the Executive Director of Friendship Ministries, an interdenominational organization dedicated to sharing God's love with people who have intellectual disabilities and enabling them to become active members of God's family. He has a degree in special education from Calvin College, serves on the leadership team of the National Council of Churches in Christ Committee on Disabilities, and is also on the advisory committee of the CRCNA Disability Concerns Committee. Nella, I'm going to let you take it from here, okay?
Thank you, Kim. Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to be here with you. I'm going to base this webinar on 3 things. 1, the Autism in Your Church book written by Barbara Newman that Friendship Ministries just revised a year ago. 2, my personal experience with including people who have autism spectrum disorder. I lead a program for 30 friends who have intellectual disabilities, including autism, at my church. We had our first meeting last night again after the summer, and I can tell you, it was wonderful. They've been coming to our church long before the buzz in the media began regarding autism. I would also like to credit my friend Diana Rock, who is a special education teacher in Pennsylvania with students who have very severe autism. And she has given me ideas that have worked for her. So I'd like to share them with you. So let's begin. The focus of this workshop or webinar is to help you effectively minister with children and adults who have autism spectrum disorder, or ASD for short. Currently, 1 out of 88 or so will have this diagnosis. And there's many reasons for the increase. 1, being that in 1994, the diagnosis of Asperger's was finally translated into English. Dr. Asperger actually came up with the diagnosis in 1944 in Austria. But now it is being applied to children and adults here in North America. This means that people who previously were not diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder have now received that diagnosis. The overall incidence of ASD is consistent pretty much around the world. 4 times more boys than girls will be given the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So this will affect a lot of things that happen. People are being back diagnosed who previously were not. So we're going to be discussing 4 main areas. 1, the common areas of difference, strategies you can use, behavior management, and spiritual formation plans, or if you want a more familiar term, spiritual IEPs. And those are the IEPs are what we use in the public school. This is much simpler than that. So what is our purpose? In children's ministry or ministry with adults, our job is to promote the spiritual growth of all the children. It is not to diagnose. We as servants of Christ are to model his love to our friends with autism. I frequently hear comments like, Tim must be autistic, or I am sure Sarah has Asperger's. Be very careful not to take on the role of a psychologist or psychiatrist. Our purpose is to see each child as an image bearer who is uniquely and wonderfully made by God. If made by God applies to children or adults with ASD or intellectual disabilities, then we need to ask, why in the world would the church exclude these people? And yet, I often hear stories from families who are told not to bring their children back to church. I heard from one family that had 2 children with autism out of their 6 children. Don't bring them back. They currently have no church nearby to worship in. That's a really sad thing when churches do that, and they were told this by several churches. We need to minister with the individual, not the disability. And we are to try our best to understand these children, learn from them as people who have gifts that maybe we don't have. Sometimes their gifts may not be easily recognized, but as children's ministry staff, we need to get to know and understand them. Every child should be seen as part of the body of Christ. People with ASD or any disability are not meant to be living in isolation. They need to be in community with others. A community of believers is a wonderful place for them to be nurtured, to learn skills that will enhance their spiritual growth, their worship experience on Sunday, and to be given opportunities for leadership within the congregation. I'd like to tell you about my friend David. David has autism. He also has cerebral palsy, hearing loss, visual problems, but he is an excellent, expressive reader, a reader who can do litanies in worship. He can read scripture in church. In fact, he does it better than a lot of people do because he rehearses. My friend Steve has a beautiful voice. He maybe doesn't articulate all the words really well, but the tenor that he gives to his singing is fabulous. We need their gifts in church. So there are more similarities than differences. So I want to be really clear that many of the children and adults will not need to be in separate classes. They can attend regular Sunday school classes or religious education. Some of the ways to assist those children on the autism spectrum can be transferred to other situations over time, including worship. So let's talk about common areas of difference. This section will be more of a definition or explanation of each item. We're going to talk about language, social skills, perspective-taking ability, repetitive themes and behaviors, sensory integration, and sensory issues. Language, that's communication. It's both receptive and expressive. This means it's both understood and expressed. This is very important to remember about people who are nonverbal. Very often people will say, well, they're nonverbal, they're low functioning. Never assume that they do not understand. For people with ASD, language can be an issue. And when combined with differences in social skills, it can be really hard to follow directions or carry on a conversation. It can make answering questions difficult. Some children may only have responsive speech and will not initiate conversation. They may have difficulty taking turns in conversation. Those who have a more severe impact may not be able to speak, but it is very possible that they understand much more than they can express or you realize. They may use gestures like pointing to express their needs. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that nonverbal means not understanding. And I'm going to give you an example that's very personal to me. My second child had apraxia, and this is a communication disorder. This means that he was profoundly speech impaired. He was unable to produce any words for many years. However, he was and is above average intelligence. And after many, many years of therapy, he now has a master's degree. He's a classic case of why you need to be very careful and not underestimate our friends. Behavior is a form of communication. You should know that behavior is often the only way that they can tell you what they need because they can't speak. So sometimes bad behavior really is trying to tell you something. Echolalia is something that happens very often. This is repeating words or phrases instead of normal responsive language. Auditory processing, trouble completing multi-step directions, or laughing, crying, or showing distress for reasons that aren't apparent to you or me. So remember, many of the idioms we use in our everyday language and in church are very difficult for these people to follow. Things like shoot from the hip, break a leg, wet blanket, meltdown. And the picture on your screen is raining cats and dogs. They may take that literally in their mind. Tell me a time when you were sad is another thing. They may think that that means an exact time, like 3 p.m. In church, we often talk about things covered by the blood of the Lamb. This can be a very disgusting picture to them. Bread and juice or wine being the body and blood of Jesus. So be very careful what words you're using. Social skills. Social decisions and judgments are an everyday occurrence for us. Figuring this out for children with ASD may be really difficult. Thus, in social interaction with a person who has ASD, let us be really clear. Children with ASD are more likely to make mistakes. They may need time to withdraw, or they may need a reset, as Barb Newman puts in her book, Autism and Your Church. Keep in mind that you are the one person who has the social skills. Instead of putting the burden on the person with ASD to change, let's think instead about us being the ones to change and understand our friend. This is an opportunity for us to grow and change. It's a God-given opportunity, rather than a time to make them change. Here's some examples of social skill differences. They may have a lack of eye contact. They may have trouble moderating the volume of their voice. They may interrupt your conversation with someone else. They may not know when to use please and thank you, when to stand up or sit down. Getting in line may be a problem, and understanding emotions. Repetitive themes and behaviors can be a gift. Do you know of any behaviors like this that you can think of? For some of our children, this will be indicated by rocking, slapping hands, spinning objects, the typical things we think of. In others, however, it might be a favorite topic. A professor may actually focus totally on a subject and study it to extreme, having Asperger's, but in his field this is acceptable. It can be seen as a gift. One young man I know with Asperger's disorder has learned the Latin names for plants. This is truly amazing. If I need to know a plant name, I call on Mark to tell me. It also makes a great game we can play. I say coneflower, and then Mark gives me the Latin name. Not that I remember the Latin name, he does, so we need to play it again. Take time to enjoy this aspect of someone rather than just pushing it off as Asperger's. I have found that by delighting in the person's interests, the label falls away, and I see a person who is interesting. So repetitive themes and behaviors can be gifts. They can be problems. Repetitive themes and behaviors are a problem when they interfere with other things. For example, if having something out of order becomes a barrier, it can prevent a child from focusing on the Bible story or the drama you are presenting. Things that could bother them could be sitting in a new place, light bulbs that are burned out or flickering, items that should be on a shelf a certain way. My friend Ryan loves furnaces. When he hears the furnace blower going on, he is distracted by it. Perspective-taking ability. This is our ability to figure out what someone else is thinking. It is our ability to accurately read or understand a social situation. This is the area that might cause us to be embarrassed, to cover up, to pray for someone. We base our response or reaction to others on cues that we receive through gestures, eyes, body language. Think of it as interpreting that body language. If you all fall asleep, and I won't be able to tell that on the webinar, but I will know that if you did and I saw you, that you are tired, that I am really boring, and that you wish you could leave, but you're too polite to do so. Someone with ASD might only see the closed eyes and not the reasons behind it. Someone with ASD may have to actually memorize the look of a sad face, a tired face, or a happy face. Adjusting their conversation may not be so easily done without cues. Sensory integration. Sensory systems are those that tell us to adjust to what is going on around us, and they allow us to adapt to a situation. The sensory differences are touch, sound, visual stimulation, movement, could be motor planning or coordination, and objects in the environment. Issues with several senses may happen at the same time. While I was writing this webinar in the office, I heard the keyboards in the office next to me. I had to tune out the sound of printing presses on the other side of the wall and the fact that my hip was aching. All of those are sensory issues. In the car, my son loves to play his CDs loud. I have to concentrate to understand the words. Since it isn't my style of music, I'm uncomfortable. We made an agreement that the driver chooses the music, but this kind of agreement is not readily made with someone who has ASD. For children in our churches, we need to think in terms of what makes a comfortable environment for them. If noise is an issue, maybe we need to think in terms of toning down the music time or allowing a child to leave if it is too uncomfortable. For example, In my friendship program, I use the church basement, and people often say to me, why don't you use the community room upstairs? Well, my friendship program has several people with autism spectrum disorder, and that room is much quieter than the community room upstairs that has a high ceiling and is very loud. A lower ceiling provides a much more comfortable environment for several of my friends. That means I don't have to yell as loud or use the microphone as much. One of those friends doesn't even like to enter the sanctuary because of the high ceiling. So, strategies to try. This is the fun part. First of all, keep a sense of humor, and this will help you find balance. Know the person or the child. This may mean interviewing the child or parent. Ask what they're interested in. Find out what is hard or easy. What can be done to make things easier for them? Put happy and sad faces, each on the side of a piece of paper, and ask, do you like the music? Is your chair comfortable? Have them point to the face that fits their answer. You may have to use lots of pictures to get some answers. Barb Newman recommends using stick figures or pictures taken from the computer. Examples, a church or people singing, a Bible. Then she uses happy and sad faces for the person to point to if they like it or don't like it. We call these response cards. Using this method, she goes on to describe how she tries to get the person to tell her how together they can change a sad experience to a happy one. You may also want to use Mayor Johnson symbols. Those are available on the internet. Some friends may not be able to tell you anything much at all, but you should be spending time observing. What situations cause distress? Boredom. Watch their body language carefully. Look not so much for laughter, but a calm and relaxed body position such as open hands. This will be a good indication of comfort. Collect information. Getting the information you learned about the person to others in your program will need to be handled carefully. You should always get permission in a written form before sharing it. And present it by focusing on the gifts and uniqueness of that person who is an image bearer of God. And remember that sometimes this information will need to be updated. And I will expand on this in the fourth section, spiritual formation planning. Another strategy to try is think along with the person. Put yourself in the shoes of the person with ASD. You will be key in this. You need to think about situations that cause distress. What happened just before the incident? Who was there? What did they do or say? What did the child hear? What words were used? Did someone touch him or her? Was there a loud noise? Communication that something is wrong will be important for you to note. Taking notes on the situation may be helpful to you. For example, Ryan, my friend who loves furnaces, was asked to read in front of the group. But what he could do with his mentor was not possible in front of the friendship program. He began laughing and squeaking. The stimulation of being in front of the group was too much. At the end, he asked, "Did I do good?" Of course, we all said yes. But I did not ask him to do it again, and I should have known ahead of time. Another example is a young man starts yelling when the music in the worship service becomes too loud. How about instead of talking to him about being quiet, you think about how distressing this may be. Help him by giving him a chance to leave the sanctuary for a drink and a moment of quiet. When he's ready, he will be able to come back in to participate again. You could have a card with a picture of a drink on it or a word that says reset and give it to him as permission to leave and reset himself so he can then return. You should probably accompany him. You may also be the person who understands the child's need to stay in place and not stand up during a drama or action song. Be helpful rather than over-encouraging him to participate in something that is very uncomfortable. I'd like to tell you a story of another friend of mine, Matt, and his birthday hat. Matt is a man who hates to wear hats, and we celebrate birthdays with a velvet birthday cake hat. Well, his mom was in the back of the room, and it was Matt's birthday. We were going to sing happy birthday to him. And she very quickly told us Matt never wears a hat. So instead, I turned to Matt and I said, do you want to wear the birthday hat? Because he had been watching all year. Other people have the birthday hat on. And to his mother's amazement and mine, he nodded yes. And every year, Matt wears the birthday hat. By giving him choice and power over the situation, Matt has been participating. Helpful routines and rituals. Think about what kinds of things you do every week. Do you take attendance? In what order do you pray and have a lesson? For someone new to the class, you might try using pictures to show them what will happen and in what order ahead of time. You may want to use some of the pictures from the back of the autism book or draw your own for things like name tags, people singing, praying, books for the storytelling, cookies if you serve them. You might use a paper strip with Velcro dots on it and put the pictures attached to that so that they have an order of what comes next. For some, always sitting in the same chair or using the same sequence of events may be important. Providing structure to a situation can be very helpful to restore calm or maintain comfort. Create an advance warning system. Change can be really tough for some people, and this can be done in several ways. Rather than springing change on the child, give him or her some warning. You might use a timer or a picture card to signal for the next activity. Something as simple as saying, in 2 minutes we will be doing prayer time can be helpful. If change is unexpected, you might want to have a picture card ready for the change and that you move it on your Velcro strip. Being prepared ahead of time will be extremely helpful. Take a break tickets or reset cards will allow the child to have some control. And this is a positive as opposed to a negative or disciplinary timeout. If you move from room to room, take a familiar item along. For rotation model Sunday schools, the teacher should be especially aware of this. One church even painted a line on the wall for a child to follow from room to room. Watch your language. The English language is filled with many sayings that make no sense. Try explaining to someone from another country what some of our idioms mean, and you will get a really good idea of how obtuse they are to someone with autism. Be careful of those words that you choose. See you later or talk to you later may mean 5 minutes later, and there's that person again. Break a leg for theater folks means have a good show, but it's really a crazy term. Someone with ASD may think you're serious. So the language of the church is very confusing as well. By reading through your lesson ahead of time, you can become aware of what can be confusing to a child with ASD. You may want to create a picture sentence of a sentence to explain it. Barb Newman also suggests that in giving instructions, use language that tells the person what to do in short sentences, such as sit down, come here. You should be patient. Don't rush. It may take some time for the child to actually process the instruction, and this is called wait time. Don't interpret a different reaction to what you said as necessarily a negative thing. It may just be an understanding of what you said. Avoid saying things like computer virus or I have a frog in my throat. And avoid saying that what you don't want them to do. State what you want them to do. And allow, again, for plenty of wait time for them to process your instructions. Carol Gray, who is the author of Social Stories, says, use visuals. If I didn't see it, you didn't say it. And most people are visual learners. People with ASD need visuals. So think in terms of pictures. You can use the visuals in our friendship materials as one resource to use in helping a child understand a lesson. And you can add them to your regular Sunday school materials or religious education curriculums if you don't have enough pictures. We suggest that you cover up parts of those papers if you have many pictures on one page. You might add simple drawings buddies or aides in a class need to be prepared ahead of time. They should be very prepared that they may need to add to the curriculum that you're using. Keep paper and pencil handy, so if you need to draw a quick picture, you have it ready. When you write things down or draw pictures, such as a request for something that will happen in the future, you can refer the child to the paper at the appropriate time. This helps him to know that you are listening and that you know what he wants. Paul, in my program, needs me to write down when our pizza night is. He's a big foodie. He knows that if I write it down and give it to him, even though he can't read, that I heard him. It makes him feel that I take him seriously, and it ends the conversation more easily. Prayer time. There are many ways to do prayer, but doing it visually by writing requests on a whiteboard allows all of the children or adults to know that you have paid attention and that God knows about it too. You need to keep their name attached to the prayer request. And if you say it out loud, that means they hear it, God hears it, and everyone else in the room. There are also other ways to do this that make the requests more concrete. You can draw a line down the middle of a board or a paper, writing thanks on one side and requests on the other, as a visual aid to help them to know what they should ask for in a prayer request. And be aware of sensory concerns. To be brief and repetitive on this, know the person. Each person is going to come to you with different needs. So you need to know them. You need to know what it is that causes sensory overload. Is it touch, lights, noise, emotions that aren't understood? Do you need to take a break card and give it to them? For some people, it's the break in the action, not a negative timeout. Be sensitive to this, and again, watch for body language. You may also want to create a quiet place that can be used and explored ahead of time. For some people, use heavy touch, like rubbing with lotion, sitting in a beanbag chair or a rocking chair. They may want to cover up with a heavy blanket. For others, it's too much noise. Try headsets or earphones without cords. Be aware that some crafts or activities involve strange tactile experiences. Paper mache might be one of them, or using clay. My friend Matt eats clay, so we find that that's not exactly the right thing to use with him. Behavior management. First and foremost, remember, this is a person created by God, not merely a diagnosis. You need to remember that God will help you to see this image bearer. For some children, their behavior is the only way they can let you know about something. Thus, your observations of what happened prior to an event is very important, and that's why I keep repeating that. This is key to managing behaviors. Some of the causes for behavior management issues are surplus energy, a desire for attention, peer pressure, boredom, could be physical discomfort, could be hidden causes, the inability to screen out unimportant sensations, hearing or speech problems. Hyperactivity from brain damage can cause restlessness. Classroom lighting, space, or heating can have a negative effect. So your attitude is going to create or reduce behavior problems. Respect the child's rights. Do not give a choice where one does not exist. For example, say, come and sit down instead of, do you want to sit down? If you've given the choice, they may choose not to sit down when you want them to. Make the payoff clear. Use if-then statements very effectively. For example, if you finish your craft, then we can have a snack. In addition, your tone of voice. Use a firm voice, not a mean one, but firm. This picture, I'm not misbehaving, I have autism, please be understanding, is key to your understanding the child or adult's behaviors. Lastly, in this area, perspective, and finding solutions. Here's the time to intervene. If they may injure themselves, for example, running, standing on chairs, headbanging. If they may injure others, we cannot tolerate negative behavior, either physical or emotional. If they may destroy a valuable property, or they may interfere with another's right to learn or enjoy the class. This might be deliberate noise-making, walking around during group time, or interrupting for the wrong reasons. Or if they're socially unacceptable. Example, if they are not respecting personal space, as in kissing. Teach a socially acceptable way to express affection, such as handshakes or a compliment. Some of them may need a card in their hand to remind them of what is acceptable. And lastly, create a spiritual formation plan, or the spiritual IEP. Who should be invited to that? Well, the following people: parents, the children's pastor, or if it's an adult program, an adult pastor, the Sunday school or religious ed director, adult assistant or peer buddy if you think that's needed, a special education teacher as needed. And in this planning meeting, you're going to have topics of discussion. And here's some questions that you might want to ask. First, start with a positive. What will ensure success? This is very different than saying, okay, your kid's autistic, so what are we going to do? You want to ask, what are the child or adult's gifts and talents? Does he or she like to draw, do puzzles, sing, read? Is there a particular talent that that child or adult has? You need to know the child. Again, we keep repeating that, but all of us in disability ministry keep saying that. Know the person, and it's key. Find out if there is a behavior plan that is effective in school or at home. Some have it and some don't, and some are positive and some are not. But if you find out that it really works, visit that location and observe who's doing the behavior plan. How did they do it? You need to share this information with volunteers at church. Train them to use the same methods. You might consider inviting to church the person who's successful in using that plan. It might be the parent, it might be the classroom teacher at school. What behaviors can be redirected and how? If the person is restless, does squeezing his hand or rubbing his back help? Is there a picture you can use? Is there a simple word that helps the child to focus? One of my children was working with a little boy at a church in Pittsburgh. And this little boy, when his sounds would begin to escalate, all you had to do was squeeze his hand. And he knew that was the cue to stop making those noises. Very simple. But if you don't know the child, you haven't talked to the parents, you won't know that. And that's why this kind of planning will ensure much more success. You need to ask in this planning, what is the child's need for reset? When should it be used? And what are indicators you should look for? Is it escalating sounds? Is it rocking? Would the take a break cards be helpful? Is there a particular picture that would help you with that? What sensory issues are involved? Go back to our previous section and get the parents and teachers to explain the child's needs. And what language issues are involved? Does the child have substitute words for something? Are there facial expressions or hand signals you need to learn? Does this child or adult use an iPad? That is becoming much more common. Do they use a go button, which you can find on the internet? And if not, is the go button very inexpensive, something that you want to use? Should you use response cards? Churches don't necessarily have money for iPads, but you may be able to come up with a very simple communication device that allows the child to say yes or no. How will other previously discussed differences affect the child? Language, social skills, the perspective-taking ability, the repetitive themes, sensory integration, and sensory issues. All of those are possibilities that you need to discuss. You may want to also ask, are there other diagnoses that you should know about? Not that you want to label the child, but they may have strong implications for things that you need to know. For instance, does the child or adult have seizures? What do you do? Does the child have obsessive-compulsive disorder? Are there things that the child or adult does for that reason? Those are helpful things in preventing uncomfortable experiences. Beyond Sunday school, what are other situations that should be addressed? Does the family have other needs that your church could help with? For example, I heard of a single mom whose child was a runner. This is very difficult if you are a single mom and your yard does not have a fence. You are going to be very afraid 24/7 what happens. So one church found out that this single mom needed a fence. They put it in. This eased her stress, and she was much more open to church after that. She knew that that church cared. They went way beyond what she expected. Her child was safe at home. It gave her time to relax. And I'm not saying every church would have to put a fence up for everyone, but maybe there's something else that needs to happen. Those are the situations that we need to find out about on these families. There might be respite needed. Friendship programs that operate before worship allow families or parents sometimes to worship together. Very often we run into families where dad goes to church one Sunday, mom the next, or mom always stays home. Respite during a friendship program that happens during the week may be the only hour and a half that they get with time off. So what does this mean to that family? This means that church gives them help. It means that their son or daughter is in a safe situation where they can relax. How often should respite be given? That determines on the needs of the family and probably how many volunteers you have. But respite may mean that if someone has a child who's 5 years old with autism, that there's another family who has 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old children. They could learn to invite that child over. Many times, the child with a disability is never invited to other people's homes. But if a family can learn to help a child become part of their family for an hour, hour and a half, the parents of that child maybe have time to spend with the other children that they have. To inspire myself for this presentation, I read a book called Acquainted with Autism by Sheila Gosney, and it helped me to think in terms of the whole family. What are the needs of the husband? He is the person who may not be spending as much time with the family because he has a job and mom's home with the child. There can be all kinds of feelings of guilt in a situation like this. Building up time for couples to have a date night is really important. One couple that I know of from Ontario are so excited because their daughter attends friendship on Monday night. What happens during that time is that mom and dad take time out during that hour and a half for dinner. This is their date night. How important for them to have time together. You're strengthening the whole family. So communicate. After you have a spiritual formation plan in place or a spiritual IEP, you need to communicate your strategies with the families of the other children. Of course, you need permission of the family of the person with ASD, or the adult with ASD may want to give that permission. This will engage more people within your congregation and help them to understand. But you also need to be with the other children and explain to them who the children are in their program. You need to check back with the Sunday school teacher or the religious ed teacher or the catechist. Ask him or her how it's going. Hold everyone accountable for the success of the child by meeting regularly. Some of our recommended resources are Autism and Your Church by Barbara Newman. You can find that on our website. I believe that Amazon carries Autism and Alleluias by Kathleen Dyer Bulldog. The Glue Training Manual you can also locate through the CLC network. A wonderful book, The Special Needs Ministry Handbook by Amy Rapata, is an excellent source for you, and that too is available on Amazon. Amy has a son with many multiple severe disabilities. He is medically fragile. She understands from a parent's point of view, as does Kathleen. Helping Kids Include Kids with Disabilities by Barbara Newman was recently revised by Faith Alive Christian Resources, and you can find it on the Friendship website or the Faith Alive website. This book is very helpful as a companion to Autism and Your Church. In that book, Barbara gives lesson plans for introducing a child with ASD or emotional disabilities. That child needs to be introduced so that the other children will understand and they can include that child. And lastly, I'd like to recommend Including People with Disabilities in Faith Communities by Eric Carter. This is a very comprehensive book, and it is widely recognized in professional communities as well. For more information, you can visit friendship.org or email me at friendship@friendship.org. And now we can take the questions and answers, and I'm going to hand it back to Kim.
Okay, Nella, thanks for your presentation. That's a lot of good information. I'm going to give people a couple of minutes to send in their questions here, and while we are waiting for those, I'm going to start with a question that was sent in on a registration form from one of our attendees from Bridges Christian Church in Russell, Kentucky. And they were asking the question, how do I help the children who are not special needs to interact with these kids with ASD?
That is an excellent question, and it was one reason I highlighted the book Helping Kids Include Kids with Disabilities. I think it is very helpful if, when those children become part of your class, program, whatever you're doing, that you think in terms of how can I explain to the other children the things that are the same. For instance, you could use fruit as one example. I've put a circle on the floor before of masking tape or a cord, and we look at that circle and we put in there bananas, and we might put apples in there. And I'll put another circle that has oranges, and find out from the children, which fruit do you like? And some children really can't stand bananas, and others can't stand apples, and others can't stand oranges. But we all might like one kind of fruit. And so you point out that as children, we like some things and other things we don't like, and we're all the same in that same way. So you get them to start thinking about who they are and what they like and don't like. And some children don't like loud noise. Some children like loud noise. So we have differences and we have similarities. Rather than focusing on, oh, this kid has a disability, you focus on the things that they like and the things they don't like. And I do think that there are some other really good explanations for this. In addition, one of the things you can do is send a letter home to the families. Let those families know that there's going to be a child who has likes and differences very similar to theirs. And there are copies of these kinds of letters in that book, Helping Kids Include Kids with Disabilities. And that book also addresses other disabilities. One of the things I didn't say in the webinar was that many of the strategies I talked about, redirecting behavior, sensory issues, do apply to other disabilities, not just autism. And these same lesson plans apply to a lot of different disabilities. You may want to use it for hearing impairment, visual, all kinds of things.
Okay, thanks. We've got your next question coming in from Carrie, and she's wondering, of the 30 in your class, are all special needs? If so, what age range is included?
Mine is a class for adults, and they have all kinds of intellectual disabilities. So some have Down syndrome, some have autism, some have cerebral palsy, which in their case, not always, but in this case, they have intellectual disabilities, seizure disorders, hearing loss, some use wheelchair, power chairs, you name it, we've got it. The age range is 20 to, I believe, 60-something. I do not recommend putting adults with children because sometimes in our society we call people who are adults with intellectual disabilities, we call them kids, but they're not. They come to us with life experience that a 6-year-old with a disability has never experienced. And I really think that it's a problem when I find a 23-year-old pushed into nursery. That is very inappropriate. So an excellent question.
Okay. We've got another inquiry from the Office for People with Disabilities. Somebody's joining us from Portland, Oregon today. Want to know what kind of helpful strategies you have for supporting children with autism in their faith formation.
If you're doing faith formation, then I'm going to assume that it's sacramental and that you're getting ready either for First Holy Communion or confirmation. And in that case, I would recommend that you email me after the webinar, and I would like to put you in touch with a friend of mine in the Diocese of Newark, because she has specialized in this area and has a lot more sacramental stuff than I do, and I think she can give you an awful lot of help with that. I think she has specialized materials for you, and she has also done this in consultation with therapists who work with children with autism.
Okay.
Sometimes it's better to refer you than to give you the wrong material.
Yeah. And I just want to mention that David Q has raised his hand. I suspect he may have a question, so I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question, we're not using raised hand because we don't have any way to address those. We're asking you to send all of your questions in using the Q&A panel, and then I'll read them to Nella as we go along. I'm going to pick another question right now, and this one's coming in from, let's see, it's not opening up. Give me just a second here. It's not cooperating with me. How do you handle a situation where a parent and you want the child mainstreamed, but their behavior, even after exhausting your repertoire of behavior management strategies, prohibits both their and others' learning? They do have specialized classrooms at this place, but Stacy's wondering, after you've done everything you can do, what's left after you've exhausted all your resources and it's still not working?
I think that's when you sit down with the parents and you say, okay, this isn't working, and you're real honest about it, and you need to either brainstorm for new strategies, or maybe you have to be very honest and say, because I have run into a few cases where the child was violent to the point where they were not able to restrain the individual, especially when they get really big, like middle school, and physically restraining a child is very impossible. There are times when maybe church has to happen in a different way. But I think you sit down with the parents and you say, okay, this isn't working. Your child's not happy. What can we do to make sure your child is happy? And I do think you have to work very hard to find an alternative. You don't want to turn the family away, but you have to really be blunt about, and clear, maybe not blunt, but clear that what's working in the main group is just not the way to go. I think it is your last alternative, as you have said, but it's not so easy. There's also one alternative that I would suggest, and that is if you emailed me afterwards, I would put you in touch with Barb Newman, and sometimes a church can, you have to pay for this service that she offers, but she might be able to write a plan for the child in how to deal with that particular thing, and I would try that as another result, but you have to get the parents' permission to do that. It is very hard if parents insist on including a child who's very uncomfortable. But you may want to look at your whole program and say, is it really loud? Is it working for everyone? And there may be other children who are uncomfortable, but they're not telling you. So that's another instance of sometimes it's very specialized for that child, and you need to have a professional intervene and give you the assistance that you need.
Okay. Got one more question here. This one's coming from David. He's talking about doing a worship service for special needs children, trying to convince the pastor a traditional service doesn't work, especially traditional worship songs. Do you have any suggestions for him?
Yeah. For some children, The quiet contemplative service, and this is true of adults with disabilities is too, for some of them, a very quiet contemplative service is the only way to go. For others, they do need more action, more drama, more visuals in the service, and they need to be close up. There are, you can use the friendship materials that way because basically we sing, we pray, we do the Bible lesson, and then we break off and do it. That really truly is a worship service, especially when you're taking prayer requests. For the pastor, you may want to try offering that alternative. Instead of 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, you may offer it during the week on a Saturday night or a Friday night. You may offer it another time. I do think that including some repetitive things in your service can be very helpful. For instance, some services don't have any repetition in them, and it's very hard for a person who doesn't read to follow along, especially if you put everything in words on PowerPoint. And it's not helpful then for a person who doesn't read, or ESL is also another example of having difficulty with all the words. So maybe you need to have songs that you sing every time. If he's very resistant, I would suggest that you give him suggestions of certain songs that maybe that song could be sung every week for a while or every other week if they don't want to. One of the things that people don't understand about worship is that routine is something that gives us comfort, and routine in worship can be comforting, just like it is in Sunday school to people with ASD. So I suggest that you sit down with him and help him to understand, think alongside the child why it's not helpful. You may want to try with the child thinking in terms of that worship doesn't have to be the whole service. Maybe the child stays in for the first 15 minutes. That's it. That's all that child, and then you go off and do something different. A lot of churches are doing that. Other churches are having a separate service that works better, and they do it at another time.
Okay, got another question from Irene. What is the church's role in helping parents to come to terms with their child's autism diagnosis from the professionals?
That's a tough one. What the church, I think, first and foremost needs to think in terms of is, for a lot of parents, any diagnosis of disability is a loss. And we so quickly will say to parents, oh, get over it and accept it. I can tell you that loss of that type is an ongoing thing. It means that we need to be very patient with these people. It's a grief process. It's the loss of what the future they had wished for and hoped and longed for is not going to be. So they may experience a loss when a child is 4, that the child is not going to go to the regular kindergarten. I think if you acknowledge that it's a loss, that is the most helpful thing. When the child grows up and the other kids are moving on and getting invited to parties and their child is not, that's a loss. When the other kids get a driver's license and their child is not, and they continue to have to find ways to bring their son or daughter places, that's a loss. And those losses keep coming back to slam that family in the face. It means that we as a church need to understand that this family is going to have more medical appointments, more therapy appointments than you can ever imagine. It's going to be a stress on them financially. So in order to help them understand the diagnosis, you need to be understanding that they're dealing with loss. And losses, like grief when someone dies, don't go in the order that we choose for the other person. They can come and go. They may have good days and they may have bad days. And you need to walk alongside them and ask them what kind of support they need. Don't assume that you know what they need. Very often I will see support groups that are run by someone else in church who's not experiencing that loss. The only thing I suggest is that if you run that kind of support group is that maybe you do some organizing and get the people together. But those families can help each other as well. And that's a very positive step forward for them. There may be another mother whose child has autism who is a few years down the road who may be an extremely good support for that person. It's not an easy road. I think your empathy and your willingness to provide them respite wherever you can and don't assume that you know what's best are probably the key in things, and knowing their child.
Okay. Thank you, Nella, and that's all the time we're going to have for your presentation today. I've got your contact information up on the screen. There was a question that came in that really was outside of children's ministry and autism, and I see another question has just popped into the queue. We won't have a chance to answer that during the webinar today, but if you would like to email Nella, you can do so at friendship@friendship.org, and she can address your question once the webinar is completed today. And we'd like to ask you again that if you would enjoy the discussion of today's topic, you can certainly continue the conversation on the network at the Disability Concerns Forum at the address that you see up on the screen here on the network in the Disability Concerns Forum. And if you would help us out at the end of the webinar today, you will get a pop-up multiple choice survey in your browser, and we'd really like you to take just a moment to answer a couple of questions. Let us know how we did today, if we met your needs, if you got suggestions for improvements. That would really be very helpful for us. And our next webinar is next Wednesday. For those of you that are interested in finance for clergy, it's going to be Clergy Finance, Pointers for Pastors and Church Leaders, presented by John Bolt, who's the Director of Finance here at the Christian Reformed Church in North America. It'll be on Wednesday, October 10th at 12 noon Eastern Daylight Time. And for all of you who joined us today, if you want to register for an upcoming event, vote on proposed webinar topics, or view today's recording, that'll be posted on www.crcna.org/webinars. You can also sign up for the weekly updates from the network, which includes everything new that's happening with webinars, and you can subscribe there at the address you see on your screen. We hope that all of you enjoyed the webinar today, and we hope to see you and that you'll be joining us in a webinar again soon. Thank you.